a social worker at Sydney Met and a social work lecturer, and I'm here today to talk to you about academic writing and research.
Please feel free to stop me at any point and clarify or add something, anything like that. So today's research and writing workshop will cover the foundations of academic research and writing, and we'll include how we work out ways in which we understand the assignment questions, we plan our writing, and we begin effective research. I guess to start with, what we need to do is actually break down what it is that we're being asked to do. So there are a range of different types of assignments that we're often requested to do. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it is a common bunch of types of assignments that are required, especially within social work. So the essay, for example, is something that we will always be in social work writing, at least for every unit, at least once. And this is where we present an argument or idea and support that argument with evidence. And we do that by linking it back to the literature and by doing research, connecting those ideas to our readings and our textbooks. Type of assignment has got a particular structure, which is the introduction, the body, the conclusions, and a separate page for references. Now, that is very different to a report, and often we're asking students to write a report. So this is an investigation of a problem, issue, situation, and you're required to present findings or information clearly and logically. It has got a completely different structure. This is where we ask you often to use headings. So I often find essays, students confuse essays where they write introduction, body or conclusion, etc., which is not required. However, these are required in a report format. So the executive summary or the abstract, if it's required, sometimes a table of contents, an introduction, the main body or the findings, and a discussion organised into sections with headings, a conclusion and potentially recommendations if they're required, references and possibly appendices. Now, a case study is different again in that this is where we look at a real life scenario. So this is particular to social work often because this is where we require the students to link their social work theory to practice situations. So this includes obviously introduction, case description, identification of problems and issues, analysis, solutions, recommendations, conclusions, references, and sometimes appendices. Now, reflective writing is something that I think that we're going to go into more detail in a later academic writing workshop. And the reason for that is that we find a lot of students really struggle with this concept of reflective writing. However, it is a core skill, essentially, that we don't want social workers to graduate without. I often tell my students that our capacity for reflective practice doesn't just help us become better social workers, it also helps us to become better people generally, better husbands, wives, sons, daughters, employees, friends, people generally. You will be better at life if you develop your capacity for reflective writing or reflective practice. So this is where we link our experience with the knowledge learned in our course, and we show this learning has influenced us or developed us or our understanding or potentially our future practice. So this includes an introduction, description of the experience, analysis, which includes our own feelings, thoughts, learnings, etc. And we link that to the theories that we've also learnt about as well. So concepts and other readings from the course. We often discuss action and our future plan. So potentially, if I was giving you a lecture on, for example, our soft skills, and I was developing your capacity to use your nonverbal language to assist you in ways to communicate. So you might, for example, identify what it is. So, for example, discuss and give me a description of what body language is. Then you might have a discussion in relation to your own thoughts, feelings, or experiences. So one of the reflections that I have read from students in the past has been, I was interested to learn from my partner that my own body language was interpreted in a different way to the way that I thought that I was coming across. So I thought that I was sort of using my body language to be non-confrontational. I was using it in a way that was, faced the client, etc. And I was open and engaged, whereas they thought that I, because I was leaning forward, that I came across as being, not interested or somehow disengaged, something like that. So it is sort of a reflection back on your experience, the way that content or that just, whatever it is that you've been talking about has made you think and feel more. And then you might relate that to action in the future. So you might say, for example, what I recognize is that the way that I anticipate that I am coming across is not always the way that my body language is received, and I should look for further cues in order to give me feedback in relation to how I am coming across, for example. So therefore, you're building your knowledge from that deeper process of reflection. So as I said, I think we'll go into reflective writing more deeply because it is more challenging. I have also got this special slide purely for presentations, because this is another type of assessment, and it's often an assessment that I find that students struggle with, and I think they also struggle with being able to really know what is required of them. So presentation also has a structure similar to the other types of assignments that I was discussing. What I find is that students don't generally give me an introduction, which is a requirement. Similar to an essay, you have to orientate the reader to what is going to be discussed. The same happens within a presentation. You are using the structure or the introduction to communicate to the audience what it is that you are going to be discussing throughout that. Oftentimes I get students that give me a history of whatever it is that they're going to talk about, or they get just jump straight in and start talking. We need to have an overview of the main points. And often here, as it says, we grab the attention or a hook. So part of our presentation is to build our skills at oral presentations, at talking to people or groups of people. And so part of that is engaging the audience. And this is where we can use the introduction to hook our audience and not just use our skills at oral presentations, but also we can use the information that we're presenting. So as it says here, a question, a statistic, a short story, something that grabs our audience attention. So then, of course, we have the same structure as what we have with essays. For example, you include the body. So the main ideas that are logically ordered. It's useful to use signposting. For example, first I'll discuss, next let's move on to this. We also need to, as with an essay, support our points with examples. So we can't just make a statement, we also need to use evidence to back that up. PowerPoints are, not just there for fun. We need to make sure that we use these in a really purposeful way. I either get PowerPoints that don't really say very much, or I get PowerPoints that say too much. The idea is that we use the dot points, so we only have a few dot points, and we use those to help us structure our discussion, essentially. And it is really important to also use references and in-text citations. Unfortunately, you're still required to have a reference page and cite and acknowledge all of the sources that you use within that. And then again, conclusion, summarise the key points, restate the purpose and demonstrate how this was met. A strong closing statement is really important. You don't just want to sort of just be like, okay, that's finished, and then everybody's like, oh, should we clap now? What's going on? Have they finished, or are they just changing presenters? All right, I also, just to sort of go over that point again, and also with all of your assignments, make sure you look at the marking criteria. This is part of what you need to do when you first start to look at what it is that you are required to do for this assignment. So there is a stage where in that process where you analyse everything, and the marking criteria is something that you need to analyse. Now, I just used a screenshot of the presentation criteria because I wanted to sort of just use that to explain to you. You can look at this marking criteria, for example, and you can look and find that your presentation skills are part of what your lecturer is looking at to make a determination of your grade. So lacks structure, for example, here we've got presentation skills and communication. So this relates to the way that you're talking and also to the structure of your assessment of your presentation. And then we can see up the top, in order to get a distinction, it needs to be well organised. You need to have an appropriate pace, and you need to have used your PowerPoints well as effective visual aids to support your oral presentation. As well, there are different things that you can use and analyse here in terms of group collaboration. So how is it that the lecturer determines that you have collaborated as a group when all the lecturer has essentially is you standing up and presenting? And that looks like being able to, everyone is contributing meaningfully. There is links between what people are saying. There's not just discrete pieces of information that people have gone away and then glued together without any sort of coherent connections between the two. So using the marking criteria, which is what the lecturers use in order to determine what your grade is, every lecturer should be able to pick up that marking criteria and grade you with exactly the same grade. It doesn't matter which lecturer is there, that marking criteria is going to determine the outcome. All right, so this is where we move on to the assignment writing process.
Now, writing an assessment, this is where we need to analyse the task. So as you can see here, we've got a number of different steps. So analysing the task, brainstorming, research, plan, write, edit, and then submit. So we're going to unpack those a little bit. So in terms of analyse, what you have been asked to do here is understand what is actually being asked of you. There are too many times that I've read reports where a student hasn't fully understood the assessment question and maybe responded to half of it really well and then completely sort of just not attended to the other half, which is really problematic when you've got a marking criteria, obviously, that requires you to respond to the whole assessment. So reading the questions and instructions really carefully, identifying keywords. So keywords, for example, discuss, compare, analyze. We're going to talk about those kind of keywords next. We need to check what kind of assignment it is, an essay, report, reflection, etc. Note the word count and the due date. Really, really important word count. It is contrary to what a lot of students often think when they first start their degree is, 2,000 words, gee, that's so difficult. In actual fact, it's much easier, often because you've got more words to play with, whereas writing a really concise 8 to 1,200 or 8 to 1,000 word essay is actually often a lot more difficult. So staying within the word count, really important. Due date, obviously, very important. Now, then we're moving on to this after we've analysed what it is that is required of us. Then we start to brainstorm a response. So what is it that we already know about what are we going to be writing about? And hopefully within your lectures and your required readings, you already have a foundational understanding of what it is that you are going to be writing about. And you will also therefore identify areas or gaps in your knowledge that you need to research as well. So you write down your ideas, your questions, and what you want to say, and what we call a mind map or a list of possible points that you'd like to talk about. Then we move on to research. So this is where we need to look for reliable information. So academic sources, blog posts and random websites are not credible sources of information. We don't know whether they are accurate or, for example, some 15-year-old kid sitting on the other side of the world, just having a little bit of a rant about nothing. An uneducated, uninformed rant. We don't want to access those ideas. We want to access the academic sources, journal articles, and of course official websites as well. I'm not saying don't go onto the internet. There is lots of government data and government-led research that is really good, especially within the social sciences to draw upon. So within this research, we take notes, we record where we found all the information from, because of course that's important in terms of referencing. I often show students the way I did it, where I would write in different colours and then I would put the reference at the end in that particular colour. So when I move around and I start cutting and pasting, I still know where it is that I need to acknowledge the initial source of that information. So thinking about this information, and also what we need to do here is in this research stage is start to think about where we can see the connections, because of course in an essay we want this to be a logical, cohesive essay that moves from one idea to the next idea by way of a connection. So it's not just a hodgepodge of a range of different ideas that don't really orientate the reader and demonstrate essentially your understanding. So you organise your ideas within the planning section, and you really nut out what it is in terms of an outline. And often here, it is good practice to then write your introduction, because, for example, you essentially know by this point all the different points that you are going to make in order to develop your argument, and therefore based on that you can actually write your introduction. So writing, then we move on to from the planning stage to the writing, which is where we turn your plan into sentences and into paragraphs. It's important that you write drafts, and I can't emphasize that enough. You don't just write one essay and then throw it in. Your ideas will evolve and materialize. Essentially, you will develop your understanding as you write, and your drafts and the number of drafts that you do will really translate into something more comprehensive, and you'll demonstrate your understanding much better. So using topic sentences is a really important aspect. This is where the first sentence of a paragraph says what it is that you're going to, that sentence essentially introduces what you're going to talk about in the paragraph. And then you're using linking sentences to close that paragraph and then link to the next topic sentence of the following paragraph. This is how we develop cohesive and logical essays. So, of course, evidence is a really important point here. We always make always within our discussion, we make a statement and then we back that up with evidence. Academic style of writing is really important, and here often it's important to edit and have your work edited, potentially if you can access that, or at least proofread. So this helps you improve your writing before you submit as well. Go back then once it's done, and then check to make sure that you have responded to all aspects of your assessment as well. I have put a note here to follow submissions instructions carefully. This is a really particularly problematic within the first semester or the first year for students. I find they come to me, oh my goodness, ma'am, I didn't submit it. It's in draft, it's been in draft. And I'm like, yes, and you could edit it that whole time. And therefore it's really unfair to other students that I just, accept it 2 or 3 weeks later when you've realized that it was in draft mode. So being really careful about making sure that you upload it within the Turnitin, that you double check the Word, the file type, make sure that it's in Word and it's got the correct version. Make sure that you follow all of those submissions. You go in and double check as well that you actually uploaded. The number of times that I have opened an assignment, gone, goodness gracious, this has nothing to do with anything that I asked of you, and then the student comes to me and says, oh no, I submitted the wrong assignment, and that's 2 or 3 weeks later and there's nothing I can really do about it. However, if you get onto that straight away, then the lecturer can just delete that, revert it to draft, and then you can put the correct submission in, and it shouldn't be a big problem. And then you submit before the deadline. All right, so a bit of a recap here. You've read the question and the instructions carefully. You check what kind of assignment it is, for example, essay, report, case study, etc. And then you identify the different keywords in the question. So this is where I talked about the task words, the content words, and the limiting words. All right. So task words are what it is that we want you to do. So for example, analyze, discuss, evaluate, etc. The content words are the key ideas or topic you should focus on. And the limiting words, they talk about the scope and what you need to include and what you shouldn't include. So we'll go more into this as an example. We have got a question here. Computers have had a significant impact on education in the 20th century. Discuss the changes they have made. So the task word, obviously this is what you are tasked to do, and that is to discuss. You're not required to analyze, you're not required to do anything else. What is required is a discussion. Now the content words relate to, here you can see, computers and education. All right, and the limiting words which you identify the scope and the limitations. So computers, what are the significant impacts that computers have had within the 20th century, and discuss the changes Okay, so you can see the limiting words there in dark green. All right, now we have got examples of task words here. This is really important, and I think that often students don't really understand the different types of task words. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. I have just identified some that we often ask or use. So it's important to identify. This is going to have a really big impact on the outcome, the marks that are allocated, that your lecturer can allocate. If you, for example, are asked to discuss, when in actual fact you are required, you then go into comparing something, of course, that is going to have a huge a huge impact on what it is that you do within that essay, and it's not going to align with the marking criteria that the lecturer is using. So just going back and having a little bit of a look here, analyze. This is where we break an issue down into its component parts, discuss them, and show how they interrelate. Making an argument. This is really, I guess, something that we often require of students. So arguing, taking a position essentially, and making an argument one way or the other. So making a case based on appropriate evidence for or against some given point of view. Now, comparing, for example. Now, you may do a whole range of these within an essay, or you may not. So it doesn't mean to say that if you are asked to discuss, that therefore you don't compare. However, it is really important to be mindful of what has initially been asked, and what you need to really focus on. So comparing is about identifying characteristics or qualities two or more things have in common, but probably point out their differences as well. This is where we're comparing and contrasting. We're probably doing quite a bit of analysis as well when in the process of comparing or contrasting something. Define. We also often ask for a definition, even within a discussion. So defining, making a statement as to the meaning or interpretation of something, giving sufficient detail as to allow it to be distinguished from similar things. Discuss, I think, is one of the more common requests of you, and this is investigate or examine by argument, examine key points and possible interpretations, and debates, giving reasons. I can't read what I've written there, too small. Giving reasons for and against. This is where we are required to draw a conclusion from our discussion. Examine, this is where we present in depth and investigate implications. Often here you'll see that a report is often required of you. Outline, indicate the main features of a topic or sequence of events, possibly setting them with a clear structure or framework to show how they are interrelated. All right, now after we've done all of this, we've analysed the question, we've looked at all of the different requirements of the essay. Also as well, another really important point is to analyse the marking criteria. So going through the marking criteria, I find that often when I talk to students and I say, well, you notice this part of the marking criteria, and they say, well, I didn't actually really understand what that meant. and it's probably written for the lecturer because it is a tool the lecturer uses in order to standardise the outcome of marking. However, that is also given to you for your information. So making sure that you read through that marking criteria. If there is anything on it that you don't understand, it's really important to go to your lecturer or just to ask a question during class. I often ask my students to ask lots of questions in class because then other students also have the benefit of hearing the answer. So ask questions. What does this mean? How do we achieve that? Another thing that these particular marking criteria do for you is to know where the standard is set. For example, I have got one particular marking criteria where I require the students to get a lot of information into a very short presentation. Okay, and so they're required to move through that very quickly, and if they go over that, they can only pass in terms of the one of the marking criterias. So I've got it very clearly set out that if on that particular criteria, if you go over time, then you cannot receive a high distinction on that particular criteria within the marking criteria. So as well, you can see the level of importance in different areas. Certainly when we're talking about reflective practice as well, reflective practice is a skill, obviously, like everything that we build. And so when students are in their third or fourth year, for example, reflection or the content and quality of the reflection might be worth 40% of the report, as an example. Now, for students who haven't really put a lot of time and effort into really working out what reflection is, it's very easy just to write an assessment and use a lot of descriptors and feel like you are probably, hopefully, fingers crossed, reflecting. And within, I guess, those third and fourth years is when we're really, I guess, we expect that the quality of reflection is really high. And without it in there, there is little chance that the student will even pass, because 40% of it is allocated to the reflection and the quality of that reflection. So without any reflection, if somebody still doesn't understand really what reflection is, then they won't pass that assessment. And that is because reflection is such an integral aspect of a social worker's role. Okay, so in terms of research, we are going to hear from Abi or Dr. Dahar, and Abi is actually going to talk to us a little bit more about using AI to research. It has, amazing opportunities that we have in terms of being able to access AI. Abi is going to talk about it in terms of how we can use it, but also how we can use it ethically or with integrity. So making sure that we still abide by our, we don't plagiarize, essentially, using AI. So yes, we'll hear from Abi soon about that. And that is it for this session. We're going to do some more academic workshops as well, so stay tuned. And thank you very much for coming.